From coast to coast, America is a land of amazing destinations. From Native American sites that have endured for centuries to geological ones that date to the age of dinosaurs. Parts of the country have seen engineering feats few thought possible and space flights that didn't even seem probable. The land has inspired writers and painters, inventors and poets, moved by beauty, necessity, or sometimes just their own ego. These are places both near and far, with stories that just might surprise you. On a dirt road in the middle of the country, something remarkable emerges out of nowhere. Chalk formations stretching 70 feet high. These are the Monument Rocks in the remote plains of western Kansas. Around 80 million years ago, in the last age of the dinosaurs, this was the bottom of a great inland sea, home to fish, sharks, and a ferocious marine reptile called the mosasaur. As the animals died, their skeletons sank to the seafloor, decomposing into this soft limestone or chalk. When the sea retreated, the towers formed. They're hard to find today. They sit on an unmarked road about 30 miles from the closest town. But the towers were an important part of history. This nearby outcropping, called Castle Rock, was a landmark for stagecoach drivers and pioneers heading west. But the formations won't be around forever. With each passing year, a little more of the towers disappear in the winds and rain of the Kansas plains. Another far more recognized canyon became an American wonder thanks to the foresight of Teddy Roosevelt and a man named John Muir. In the early 1900s, few people had explored the Grand Canyon in northern Arizona. Train service didn't start here until 1901. But in the spring of 1903, Roosevelt halted a political trip to visit it along with Yosemite and Yellowstone. Muir, a naturalist who founded the Sierra Club, served as Roosevelt's guide for part of that trip. Their passionate talks about the American wilderness ultimately helped shape one of Roosevelt's greatest legacies, conservation. The president knew it would take years for Congress to approve the Grand Canyon as a national park. So in 1908, he cut through the red tape by designating it a national monument, something that didn't need congressional approval. That power came from the recently passed Antiquities Act, which was intended to preserve prehistoric Native American ruins and artifacts. The move protected 800,000 acres of the canyon, but still allowed private development and hunting in some parts. In 1919, President Woodrow Wilson signed legislation that turned the Grand Canyon into a national park. It finally was a place that, as Roosevelt said, could be a site of grandeur for your children, your children's children, and all who come after you. Roosevelt was also key in protecting another Arizona treasure, Montezuma Castle. Located in the center of the state, the 12th century building is one of the best preserved prehistoric cliff dwellings in North America. White settlers, who erroneously thought the Aztecs built this and all other southwestern ruins, named it after one of their prominent rulers. Turns out, it was actually an ancient people called the Sinagua. But the name stuck. Archaeologists think the inhabitants reached the building with a series of ladders that they then pulled up to prevent enemy tribes from entering. The same cave that protected them has preserved this architectural site for more than 9 centuries. Further west in Phoenix is an event that's managed to weather 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and some natural disasters. The Arizona State Fair is among the oldest in the country, dating back to 1884, 28 years before Arizona even became a state. The very first fair was short-lived. A flood destroyed its site in 1891. 14 years later, a determined citizens group revived it by purchasing this site. Today, more than 1 million people come out each fall for the dizzying rides and unusual foods, which include fried alligator tail and donut burgers. In central Colorado, a one-of-a-kind theme park is centered around a major engineering feat, the Royal Gorge Bridge. In the 1920s, a Texan named Lon Piper was mesmerized by the natural beauty of this Arizona River Canyon. Piper dreamt of building a bridge here to give visitors an unmatched view, and people in nearby Canyon City backed him, hoping it would generate some income. Despite the inherent challenges, workers completed it in 6 months. When the bridge opened in 1929, it was the highest suspension bridge in the world, a title it held for 72 years. China finally built a taller one in 2001. Today, it's home to a host of rides, most of which involve swinging 956 feet over the Arkansas River. About the same time the bridge opened, a nearby attraction was gaining steam. This is the Cog Railway on Pikes Peak, just outside Colorado Springs. It was the brainchild of a man famous for his mattresses. Zalman Simmons, an inventor and founder of the Beauty Rest Mattress Company, needed to get to the top of Pikes Peak to check on one of his latest creations, insulators for telegraph wires. After an exhausting 2-day mule ride, he decided there had to be a better way. Soon, the world's highest cog railway was running. The train climbs 8.9 miles through Colorado blue spruce and above the timberline where wild elk roam free. About the same time the train was getting up and running, a college professor named Catherine Lee Bates visited the summit by carriage and mule. Her visit inspired her to write the poem America the Beautiful, which later became the lyrics to the popular anthem. A much different anthem took America by storm, thanks to Red Rocks, just outside Denver. On a cold, misty night in 1983, this is where a young band named U2 gave their breakout performance of Sunday Bloody Sunday. Over the years, the natural and perfect acoustics here have attracted rock stars and opera stars alike. Their sounds reverberate off two 300-foot monoliths, both taller than Niagara Falls. Gradual earth movements raised these giants from the prehistoric ocean floor millions of years ago. Powerful geological forces also left a remarkable fossil record here. The 868-acre park features dinosaur tracks along with fossils from marine reptiles that swam here when it was covered by an ancient sea. Much of Colorado used to be underwater, including this surreal site in southern Colorado. This is Great Sand Dunes National Park, at the base of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Scientists believe the 750-foot dunes started forming about 440,000 years ago, when the ancient lake Alamosa began to disappear. Winds from the surrounding mountains blew the sand and sediment left behind, forming the dunes. The earliest visitors were nomadic people hunting mammoth and bison. Their spear points have been found here. Over the centuries, the dunes have served as a landmark for early explorers, a mining spot for men seeking gold, and now as a playground for people of all ages. But Colorado's biggest and arguably best destination is the Rocky Mountains. Nestled at its northern end is Rocky Mountain National Park, which exists largely because of a teenage boy. In 1884, a sickly 14-year-old named Enos Mills left Kansas for Colorado, hoping the climate would improve his health. His mother, who'd lived here, often told him incredible stories about the mountains. He climbed Long's Peak at 15 and fell in love. In the years that followed, he pushed for a national park, finally succeeding in 1915. In all, that once sick boy climbed Long's Peak more than 300 times, both alone and as a guide, and became one of the world's best-known naturalists. From the Colorado Rockies comes a powerful river that could only be tamed by an equally mighty dam. In a remarkable feat of ingenuity and engineering, the U.S. government built the Hoover Dam to tame the Colorado River, which devastated land by flooding in the spring, then drying up in the winter. Congress also hoped they could harness some of the river's power for electricity, irrigation, and drinking water. 5,200 men worked around the clock, completing the dam 2 years ahead of schedule and $15 million under budget. Head architect Gordon Kaufman set about creating something that would complement the engineer's design. His team put aside ornamental plans drafted by previous architects, instead creating a modern Art Deco style. The 4 large intake towers sit in Lake Mead, the massive reservoir that provides water to much of the Southwest. The towers drive the water into massive turbines, which generate hydroelectric power, a clean, renewable source of energy that provides power to 29 million Americans in California, Nevada, and Arizona. Water is also a driving force in the northern reaches of the Midwest, along the Michigan coast. The state is surrounded by 4 Great Lakes: Erie to the southeast, Huron in the northeast, Superior to the north, and Michigan to the west. And that coastline is home to more lighthouses than any other state, with a history that dates back to 1825. Few are still in service, replaced by more modern navigational systems. Today, many are museums, homes, and B&Bs, giving people a taste of history and sometimes even a creative way to make a future. Some of the ships guided by those lighthouses ended up here, at an amazing site called the Soo Locks, the only passage between the lower Great Lakes and Lake Superior. Built in the 1800s, the locks sit at the northernmost point of Michigan's Upper Peninsula, in the tiny town of Sault Ste. Marie, often called the Soo. They straddle the U.S.-Canadian border, where rapids once made ship passage impossible. Northbound ships rise as if on an elevator, 21 feet from Lake Huron to Lake Superior. When they complete the passage, the ships are in another Sault Ste. Marie, in Ontario, Canada. The town was split as a result of the War of 1812. Another of Michigan's engineering marvels is also on the Upper Peninsula, the Mackinac Bridge. It opened in 1957, after years of debate over how to connect Michigan's two peninsulas. One far-fetched idea involved a floating tunnel. Its chief engineer, David Steinman, faced three main obstacles: high winds, deep water, and the pressure of ice accumulation. He came up with innovative solutions for each, setting standards still used in bridge building worldwide. Michigan's Lower Peninsula is home to a site that's captivated people for centuries: Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore, a 35-mile stretch of sand and two neighboring islands. This area got its unique name from a Native American legend. The story goes that a forest fire drove a mother bear and her two cubs from the Wisconsin shoreline into Lake Michigan. When the mother made it across, she climbed a cliff to search for her cubs, but they drowned just offshore. The great Indian spirit Manitou was so moved, he let her fall asleep here, creating a solitary dune in her honor. Today, families flock to the dunes year-round to hike, swim, and play, with some even attempting the dune climb, a 450-foot trek from bottom to top. In northwestern New Mexico is an amazing archaeological site where an ancient people once thrived. These ruins were part of a network of villages built by the ancestral Pueblo people called the Anasazis. After centuries of living in vulnerable pit houses, they started experimenting with stone and mud mortar in the 9th century, eventually building these great houses. The largest held multiple families with hundreds of interlinked rooms. A network of roads and settlements connected the people until the 12th century, when drought likely drove them away. Some migrated to the nearby Frijole Canyon, home to the Bandelier National Monument. Ancestral Pueblo people arrived here in the 11th century and stayed for approximately 400 years, constructing their homes with soft volcanic rock. In the 1500s, faced with overpopulation and a changing environment, the people moved again toward Taos, New Mexico, where many descendants still live today. That area is also home to the much revered San Francisco de Asís Mission Church. Its sculptural lines have been celebrated for centuries, but the actual architect isn't known. Spanish colonists who settled here started building the church in 1772, a process that took more than 4 decades. The adobe building was a favorite subject of photographers Paul Strand and Ansel Adams, along with painter Georgia O'Keeffe, who returned to it again and again. 60 miles southwest of the church is another site that inspired O'Keeffe and many others, Ghost Ranch, home to Kitchen Mesa. The hill and surrounding 21,000 acres have been preserved thanks to an environmentalist named Arthur Pack. He bought this ranch in 1936 and let O'Keeffe rent a summer cottage here. In 1955, much to O'Keeffe's dismay, Pack donated the entire thing to the Presbyterian Church. Its leaders continued Pack's mission to preserve the land, which is also home to dinosaur fossils, Navajo relics, and the flat-topped mountain Pedernal, another beloved subject of O'Keeffe's. A famous Southern figure also found inspiration in his surroundings in Oxford, Mississippi. Novelist William Faulkner grew up in this small town and, in his writing, immortalized both the area and its social issues. The Lafayette County Courthouse appears in his book Requiem for a Nun, famous for the line, "The past is never dead. It's not even past." Faulkner bought this home just outside Oxford in 1930. The year after, The Sound and the Fury was published. He named it Rowan Oak after a Scottish legend about the protective power of rowan trees. Faulkner remained largely unknown until 1949, when he won the Nobel Prize for Literature, followed 5 years later by the Pulitzer. The South is also home to some of America's most legendary land, the swamps of Louisiana. Stretching from the Big Easy all the way to Texas, this rich ecosystem was vital to the early Cajuns, who survived by hunting, fishing, and trapping, though they also saw the bayous as a source of danger and evil spirits. Today, the swamps are home to flocks of white egrets, thousands of American alligators, and forests of bald cypress, which fend off rot with the oil in their trunks. A few hours west of New Orleans, nature also takes center stage at Bird City, a nesting spot for 20,000 birds, including snowy and great egrets, blue herons, wood ducks, and geese. The preserve came about in a rather unusual way. In 1895, Edward Ned McElhaney, the son of Tabasco founder Edmund McElhaney, was concerned that the high demand for feathered women's hats was driving Louisiana's snowy egret to extinction. Ned waded into the swamp, caught 8 young egrets, and raised them himself in a rookery next to his house. It was Louisiana's first wildlife preserve. "1,100 miles northeast of Louisiana is the nation's first capital, Philadelphia. On July 4th, 1776, the Founding Fathers adopted the Declaration of Independence here at Independence Hall. Four days later, the famous Liberty Bell rang out from this steeple, calling citizens to hear the Declaration read. Today, a replica called the Centennial Bell hangs here, while the Liberty Bell is on display across the green. 9 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence lived in Pennsylvania, including a key figure in American history, Benjamin Franklin. Today, his home and print shop are marked by these simple frame girders. The original home was torn down in the 19th century, but archaeologists have uncovered wall foundations, wells, and more. Franklin spent his last years here until his death at the age of 84. 20,000 mourners came to his funeral in the city he loved. The southern state of Alabama is home to a surprising sight. This is the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, birthplace of the Saturn V, the type of rocket that put the first man on the moon. But America might not have developed that technology without World War II. Dr. Wernher von Braun designed rockets for the Nazis until he surrendered to the Americans, who used his expertise to develop ballistic missiles in Huntsville. After the Cold War with Russia began, the space race started, with each country trying to prove its superiority. NASA was born in 1958, establishing the Marshall Space Center here 2 years later. Soon, von Braun and his team began developing Saturn rockets, ultimately testing 32 designs. Each one worked. Finally, in 1969, powered by a Saturn V, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins lifted off. Today, a crater is named after von Braun, one you can see very clearly. From a mountaintop more than 4,000 miles away on the big island of Hawaii. This is the W.M. Keck Observatory on the summit of Mauna Kea, a dormant volcano so remote, it's one of the best places on Earth to study outer space. 11 nations have telescopes here, where they've made key discoveries about the formation of stars and the origin of black holes. The volcano sits near the center of the Big Island, and on its southern end is the most active volcano in the world, Kilauea, part of Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. It's been emitting steam and lava since 1983 in what are called quiet eruptions, meaning gases escape slowly instead of in one violent burst. The natural forces at work here help scientists study how land masses may have been formed millions of years ago and are still being formed today as cooling lava expands Hawaii's coastline bit by bit. Hawaii itself was born around 40 million years ago from sea volcanoes and the shifting earth. which helped mold this spectacular scenery on the Maui coast. The 8 islands were annexed by the United States after decades of fighting between Native Hawaiians and American businessmen over who should govern them. The last monarch of the islands was overthrown in 1893. But many in Congress opposed annexation until the Spanish-American War in 1898, when the strategic importance of Pearl Harbor became clear. 2 years later, Hawaii became a U.S. territory, and in 1959, it became a state. Over the years, its unique location, thousands of miles from any continent, has helped protect the diverse and stunning landscape. Another pristine set of islands was created by a far different geological force. Thousands of years ago, melting glaciers helped carve out the San Juan Islands, located north of Washington's Puget Sound. They sit in the state's far northwest corner, where 4 are reachable by ferry and the rest only by private boat. Thanks to their remoteness, many parts of the islands exist largely as they have for centuries, as a playground for sea lions, bald eagles, and other wildlife. 100 miles south of the islands is a much praised site, Seattle's Olympic Sculpture Park. For decades, this was a drab petroleum facility. Then, in 1999, the Seattle Art Museum bought the land, the last stretch of undeveloped property on the waterfront. Over the next 8 years, the museum and the Trust for Public Land transformed it into an oasis of art and green space. At its center, a 2,200-foot path through the 4 main ecosystems of the Pacific Northwest. An evergreen forest, a grass-filled meadow, an aspen grove, and a saltwater shore. Interspersed in the park are several sculptures, including Alexander Calder's The Eagle, which he created in 1971 at the apex of his career. The inspiration for the park came from the mountains that sit across the Puget Sound. This is the Olympic Range in Olympic National Park. The British mariner who named the mountain range was so awed by them, he thought Greek gods could live here. Covering an area bigger than Rhode Island, the park is actually made up of rainforests, beaches, glaciers, and the Olympic mountain range. The highest peak, Mount Olympus, is covered with glaciers, including the spectacular Blue Glacier. The park also protects some of the most pristine temperate rainforests in the U.S. and 73 miles of uninterrupted coastline. Across the country, a far different coastline with a remarkable natural resource, South Florida's Everglades National Park. The massive and complex ecosystem is actually a slow-moving 40-mile-wide river, home to many endangered plants and animals. It's also the only place in the world where alligators and crocodiles coexist. The next spot is as far south as you can get in the U.S. by car, thanks to the engineering marvel of the Overseas Highway. From Miami, it takes you across the stretch of islands that make up the Florida Keys. and ends 128 miles later on in Key West. This town is famous for its bars and laid-back attitude, but there's a lot more to it than that. The 2,900 square nautical miles surrounding the Keys are a national marine sanctuary, home to thousands of species of wildlife, dozens of shipwrecks, and one of the world's largest reefs. Key West was also home to Ernest Hemingway in the 1930s. The Nobel Prize-winning author lived with his family in this Spanish colonial, where he wrote the novel For Whom the Bell Tolls, among others. You can still find descendants of his six-toed cat, Snowball, on the property. The same year Hemingway published his first novel, America was taking on this, the first modern national highway, known as Route 66. In the 1920s, the United States was changing rapidly, in large part because of the increasingly affordable automobile. But roads in the country were a mess. In 1921, the government set about creating a highway with wider lanes and fewer curves that could connect urban and rural areas. Officially commissioned in 1926, Route 66 relied largely on existing roads and wasn't even fully paved until 1938. But its route from Chicago through St. Louis and to Los Angeles soon started changing lives, allowing farmers to more easily transport goods, jump-starting the trucking industry, and creating mom-and-pop businesses along the way. Route 66 ended here, in the state of California, home of Big Sur and the Pacific Coast Highway. This dramatic 90-mile section, where the Santa Lucia Mountains meet the sea, is filled with sheer cliffs and waterfalls. And Highway 1 is the only way through it. This road was the dream of a doctor and entrepreneur named John Roberts, who traversed this rocky terrain on horseback to reach patients. In 1894, after a trip to reach shipwreck victims took him 4 grueling hours, Roberts finally photographed this stretch between San Simeon and Carmel, becoming the land's first surveyor. It took years to secure funding, but in 1919, construction began. One stretch heads over another modern marvel, Bixby Creek Bridge, one of the highest single-arch bridges in the world. As the highway twists north, it takes you to what golf enthusiasts would certainly call an amazing destination, Pebble Beach. In the early 1900s, a man named Samuel F.B. Morse, named after his great-uncle, inventor of the Morse code, was told by his developer bosses to make the California peninsula profitable. At the time, they were having a hard time selling lots here and wanted to unload them all for $1.3 million. Morse decided to put in a golf course and got 2 amateurs to design it with him for free. When it was done, Morse bought the land himself, then owned and operated it for the rest of his life. His family eventually sold it for $72 million. Up the coast in San Francisco is green space of a different kind, Golden Gate Park. But 150 years ago, this land wasn't even green. It was all sand and rolling dunes with barely any trees. The park's planners changed that when they planted a strain of grass that anchored the sandy soil. In the western end of the park is one of the park's newest additions, the new green home of the California Academy of the Sciences. The massive $500 million facility includes a natural history museum, a planetarium, an aquarium, and a rainforest. For a true sense of America's amazing wilderness, few states can compete with Oregon. In the foothills of the Ochoco Mountains, up the Crooked River, is the rock climbing mecca of Smith Rock State Park. Millions of years ago, a massive volcanic eruption spewed hot ash, lava, and chunks of rock here, which cooled and weathered into these great stone pinnacles. The soft rock, or welded tuff, is part of the draw for rock climbers, who started flocking here in the 1960s. But no one knows exactly who discovered the park. It might have been a former sheriff named John Smith traveling here in 1867. Or it could have been Private Voke Smith, a U.S. cavalry member who fell to his death here fighting Native Americans in 1863. Climbers do agree this is one of the premier places in the world for their sport. Particularly this outcropping called Monkey Face, which is among the hardest ascents in the world. Oregon is also home to the Columbia River Highway, the first planned scenic highway in the country. It was the dream of an industrialist named Sam Hill, who believed a good road would help the area prosper. Hill's own farm failed, but the highway didn't. Completed in 1922, it was hailed as an engineering masterpiece for its integration into the surrounding landscape. Hill went on to help build the Pacific Coast Highway. Today, kite surfers and tourists can enjoy all the river has to offer, thanks to one man's dogged determination. A lumber baron named Simon Benson was also a proponent of the road, and one-time owner of this, Multnomah Falls, which sits just off the highway. A Native American legend says the waterfall was created to win the love of a young princess who wanted a hidden place to bathe. Benson, a passionate philanthropist, believed the site was so spectacular it ought to be enjoyed by everyone. So in the early 1900s, he bought the waterfall, along with 400 additional acres, then donated the whole lot to the city of Portland. The pedestrian bridge at the bottom of the falls was built by and named for Benson. Today, the waterfall is among Oregon's most visited sites. This part of Oregon was breathtaking to two of its earliest visitors, Lewis and Clark. They traversed the state with a small party of men and a woman named Sacagawea, emerging at the Pacific in 1805. They'd started their exploration of the uncharted West from St. Louis a year and a half earlier. Today, the camp they set up in these evergreens, which they named Fort Clatsop, is part of Lewis and Clark National Historical Park. From here, the intrepid explorers continued to travel the Oregon coast, at one point climbing the 1,000-foot peak of Tillamook Head on an expedition to find whale blubber. It was a long, difficult climb, but from the top, Clark said, "I behold the grandest and most pleasing prospect which my eyes ever surveyed." That same sense of wonder has helped define America, motivating some men to conquer the country's highest peaks and others to travel beyond the Earth's atmosphere, all the way to the moon. It's driven engineers to build bridges in what seemed like impossible places, and helped artists create some of the country's most celebrated works. Remarkable people and places in a country that continues to inspire.